The story of George Westinghouse begins not with a eureka moment in a laboratory, but with a father's leather whip and a child's defiant optimization. October 6, 1846. Central Bridge, New York. A boy named George was born into a world of machines and ambition. His father operated a farm equipment factory, the kind of place where innovation wasn't a luxury, but a necessity. This boy would become the architect who electrified the world, yet almost nobody remembers his name. While Thomas Edison's face graces textbooks and museums, while Nikola Tesla's name appears in countless documentaries, George Westinghouse remains the shadow figure, the man who built the infrastructure that made both their inventions matter. Young George Westinghouse was not a pleasant child. When he wanted something and was denied it, he didn't accept the answer. He screamed. He hollered. He threw himself on the ground and banged his head against hard surfaces until he got what he wanted. His parents watched this strange, obsessive behavior unfold year after year. Other children learned to accept boundaries. George Westinghouse learned to demand better solutions. One afternoon, his father decided to teach him discipline. A whip came out. The punishment was swift and severe. But as the leather switch broke apart mid-strike, something extraordinary happened. Young George, tears streaming down his face, didn't ask for mercy. He didn't apologize. Instead, through his tears, he pointed to a leather whip hanging on the wall and said, "There's a better one, Father." Even as he was being punished, he was optimizing. Even in pain, he was seeking superior solutions. Decades later, as an adult who had changed the world, Westinghouse reflected on this exact moment. "I have always known what I wanted and how to get it. As a child, I got it by tantrums. In mature years, by hard work." This wasn't false modesty. The obsessive tantrums of childhood, the inability to accept no, the compulsion to find better answers. These weren't flaws he overcame. They were the raw material of genius, refined through decades of discipline into something the world had never seen before. Act 1. The Making of an Inventor. George showed little interest in formal schooling. Mathematics fascinated him. Everything else felt like an obstacle to the real education happening in his father's workshop. In the shop, surrounded by machines and men solving practical problems, George came alive. He observed how things worked. He imagined how they could work better. He built, tested, failed, and rebuilt. By 1863, when he was 16 years old, the Civil War was grinding toward its final years. The conflict that was reshaping America called to him. He enlisted, serving first in the 12th Regiment of the New York National Guard, then transferring to the 16th Regiment of the New York Cavalry. A month after his discharge, he joined the Union Navy as acting third assistant engineer aboard the gunboats USS Mascouta and USS Stars and Stripes. While others his age were learning to follow orders, Westinghouse was studying engines, understanding steam systems, learning the mechanical heart of warfare. He was discharged in August 1865. He was 19 years old. After the war, Westinghouse briefly tried college at Union College to study engineering. The rigid curriculum frustrated him intensely. Lectures on theory without application, textbooks instead of workshops. He dropped out during his first term. Back in his father's shop, everything changed. His mind, starved for practical problems, suddenly had access to unlimited challenges. At 19, he received his first patent, a rotary steam engine. At 21, he invented the car replacer, a device that guided derailed freight cars back onto tracks, and the railroad frog, a reversible junction piece that allowed trains to switch between different tracks. These weren't flashy inventions. They solved practical problems that killed people and wasted resources. But they worked. In 1867, Westinghouse met Marguerite Erskine Walker on a Hudson River Railroad train. She was selling magazine subscriptions. He wasn't initially interested until he saw an article about tunnel construction in the France-Italy Alps, where engineers used compressed air technology to bore through solid rock. He subscribed. He asked for her sample copy. Then he did something that reveals who George Westinghouse was. He obtained character references from 3 family friends and had a local minister write to Marguerite, attesting to his integrity and good character. They married in August 1867. She was 24. He was 20. They would remain married for 47 years. In 1868, Westinghouse moved with his wife to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. The city was becoming America's steel capital. Better steel meant he could manufacture more reliable machines. Cheaper steel meant he could make better products at lower costs. Pittsburgh was where he needed to be. Act 2. The Air Brake Revolution. Imagine a freight train carrying 50 cars of cargo, barreling down a mountain at 20 miles per hour. The engineer sees another train ahead. He pulls the brake lever in his cabin. Nothing happens to the front cars. Nothing happens to the middle cars. The cars at the rear continue at full speed, pushed forward by the weight of 50 cars of inertia. The collision is inevitable. Before Westinghouse's air brake, this was how trains worked. The engineer could not stop them safely. Stopping a long train required brakemen, brave, desperate men who climbed onto the roof of moving cars and manually turned brake wheels on each individual car. This process took 20 seconds on a 50-car train. During those 20 seconds, the train was still moving. Thousands of brakemen died or were maimed every year. The industry accepted this as the cost of doing business. Progress demanded sacrifice. Safety was impossible. This was simply how trains worked. Westinghouse would not accept this. During his travels, he witnessed the aftermath of a collision. The 2 engineers had seen each other. They'd had time to react. They'd pulled their brake levers. And they'd collided anyway because the trains couldn't stop in time. In that moment, Westinghouse didn't see a tragedy. He saw a problem begging to be solved. His mind locked onto this challenge. He couldn't let it go. He wouldn't let it go. What if brakes could be applied to all cars simultaneously? What if air under pressure could do the work that had previously required men climbing on moving trains? In early 1869, at age 22, Westinghouse received his first air brake patent. He founded the Westinghouse Air Brake Company in July and demonstrated his system publicly in Pittsburgh. The concept was elegant. An air compressor in the locomotive created pressure. This pressure traveled through a single air pipe running the length of the train. The engineer could apply brakes to every car simultaneously by releasing pressure in the airline. The first system had a flaw. If the air pipe broke or became disconnected between cars, the brakes downstream would fail. The system depended on continuous airflow. A severed pipe meant disaster. Westinghouse recognized this limitation immediately and spent the next 2 years obsessively improving his design. In 1872, he patented the automatic air brake. This version inverted the logic entirely. Instead of applying pressure to engage brakes, the system used pressure to hold brakes open. If the airline broke, if cars became disconnected, if anything went wrong, the brakes automatically engaged. The failure mode was safety. This was brilliant engineering. This was obsessive problem-solving at its finest. By 1893, the U.S. government mandated that all trains must use air brakes. Westinghouse had not merely invented a device, he had transformed railroad safety from an aspiration into a legal requirement. Thousands of brakemen who would have died continued to live. Millions of passengers who might have perished in collisions arrived safely at their destinations. This wasn't just an invention. This was the infrastructure of survival. Act 3. The War of the Currents. In 1886, Westinghouse turned his attention to electricity. Thomas Edison dominated the industry with his direct current system. Edison had built the first central power station in New York City. He had created the infrastructure of urban electrical lighting. His name was synonymous with electrical innovation. Challenging Edison seemed foolish, but Westinghouse had read about alternating current technology developed in Europe. AC could be transmitted over long distances at high voltages and then stepped down for local use. DC couldn't do this. Edison's system required a power station every mile because direct current couldn't travel far without losing power. Alternating current could serve an entire region from a single generating station. Westinghouse purchased the rights to transformer patents from European inventors. In 1888, he hired Nikola Tesla, paying him $75,000 for his polyphase AC motor patents and offering him a $2 royalty on every horsepower of electrical capacity sold. Tesla's motor solved the problem of converting AC electricity into mechanical power. With Tesla's patents and his own engineering team, Westinghouse now had a complete AC system. Edison fought back viciously. He launched a public campaign to associate alternating current with danger and death. Edison's team publicly electrocuted animals to demonstrate AC's lethality. They supported the development of the electric chair, specifically designed to use Westinghouse alternating current to associate AC with execution. Edison called it being Westinghoused. This wasn't scientific debate, this was corporate warfare. Westinghouse refused to respond in kind. He didn't attack Edison personally. He didn't stage competing demonstrations of DC's dangers. Instead, he focused on proving his system's superiority through engineering and competitive pricing. He bid on major contracts. He won the bid to illuminate the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago, undercutting Edison's company by half. 27 million visitors saw the White City lit by Westinghouse alternating current. It was the largest demonstration of electrical lighting in history. In 1893, Westinghouse won the contract to build the Niagara Falls Power Station. This was the decisive battle. Niagara Falls could generate enormous hydroelectric power, but the nearest major city, Buffalo, was 26 miles away. Direct current couldn't travel that distance. Only alternating current could transmit Niagara's power to Buffalo. The contract went to Westinghouse. When the Niagara Falls Power Station began operation in 1896, transmitting electricity 26 miles to Buffalo, the War of the Currents ended. Alternating current had won. The electrical infrastructure of the modern world would be built on Westinghouse's system. Edison had lost. Act 4. The Natural Gas Revolution. While fighting the War of the Currents, Westinghouse was simultaneously revolutionizing another industry. In 1883, natural gas was discovered near Pittsburgh. The gas was escaping into the atmosphere, wasted. Westinghouse saw opportunity where others saw only a byproduct. He purchased a large property in the region and began drilling. He developed systems for safely distributing natural gas through pipelines. He designed regulators that controlled gas pressure. He created the infrastructure that would eventually heat millions of homes and power countless industries. In 1884, Westinghouse founded the Philadelphia Company to distribute natural gas in Pittsburgh. He invented a pressure regulator that automatically adjusted gas flow, making distribution safe and practical. He pioneered the concept of metered natural gas delivery to individual customers. Today, the natural gas utility industry operates on principles he established over a century ago. Act 5. Steam turbines and the future of power. In 1895, Westinghouse recognized that the reciprocating steam engines powering most electrical generation were reaching their limits. They were large, inefficient, and required constant maintenance. He saw the potential in steam turbine technology. Westinghouse acquired rights to the Parsons turbine from Britain and began developing improved versions. Steam turbines spun continuously, converting steam energy directly into rotational motion without the complex pistons and cylinders of traditional engines. They were smaller, more efficient, and produced smoother electrical output. By the early 1900s, Westinghouse steam turbines were powering electrical generation stations across America. The technology he championed would eventually power nuclear plants, coal plants, and natural gas plants worldwide. Today, the majority of the world's electricity is generated by steam turbines descended from Westinghouse designs. Act 6. The philosophy of business. Westinghouse's approach to business was as revolutionary as his inventions. He pioneered the Saturday half-holiday for factory workers, giving them weekend leisure time decades before this became standard. He created pension systems for retired employees. He established accident insurance programs. He believed that well-treated workers were more productive, more loyal, and more innovative. His Pittsburgh factory complex was designed with worker welfare in mind. Clean facilities, natural lighting, ventilation systems. These weren't luxuries or public relations gestures. Westinghouse genuinely believed that treating workers with dignity was both morally right and economically efficient. He also pioneered research and development as a business function. He hired scientists and engineers not to work on immediate products, but to explore possibilities. He understood that investment in pure research would yield practical innovations years later. His approach anticipated the corporate research laboratories that would define 20th century technological development. Act 7. The Fall. By 1907, George Westinghouse controlled a network of companies spanning electrical equipment, railway signals, air brakes, natural gas distribution, and heavy industry. He employed tens of thousands of workers. His companies operated across America and Europe. He had transformed multiple industries and won countless patent battles. He seemed invincible. Westinghouse's expansion strategy was extraordinarily ambitious. To fund new ventures, he borrowed heavily against the profits of established companies. When these ventures succeeded, which they usually did, he could service the debt and expand further. It was an aggressive strategy that worked brilliantly during economic growth. But it contained a fatal vulnerability. If growth ever stopped, if the economy ever contracted, if investors ever lost confidence, the entire structure could collapse. In 1907, the financial world stopped believing in growth. The stock market crashed, banks failed, credit disappeared. The Westinghouse Air Brake Company carried no debt. It was a fortress. It survived easily. But Westinghouse Electric, expanded through decades of borrowing, suddenly became vulnerable. Banks called in their loans. Credit lines closed. The company needed to refinance, but nobody was lending. J.P. Morgan, the most powerful financier in America, had wanted to absorb Westinghouse into a consolidated electrical monopoly. Westinghouse had refused, believing that consolidated monopolies stifled innovation. Now, in 1907, Morgan and other bankers moved decisively. They seized control of Westinghouse Electric. Westinghouse lost ownership of his own company, the company he had built from nothing, the company that had electrified America. The newspapers turned on him. They blamed him for mismanagement. They claimed he had overspent on overseas expansion. They said he had wasted money on fruitless experiments. They criticized his generous treatment of workers. These criticisms were profoundly unfair. Westinghouse's spending had created the infrastructure of modern electrical civilization. But in 1907, nobody wanted to hear it. The newspapers called him a failure. One biographer, traveling with Westinghouse past his enormous East Pittsburgh works after losing control, observed his response. George turned his face towards the bleak hills on the other side of the way, with an expression so pathetic as to break one's heart. Imagine having spent your entire life building something. Imagine looking out at the factory you created, the thousands of workers whose lives you transformed. And now it belongs to bankers. And now you're the failure. His loyal employees understood what the newspapers didn't. They offered to work at half pay to help him weather the crisis. Westinghouse refused. He wouldn't exploit their loyalty. He wouldn't let them sacrifice their wages to pay for his financial crisis. He would face this alone. Act 8. The Legacy. By 1911, Westinghouse had severed all ties with his companies. Legally and emotionally, he was finished with the electric business. But his mind never stopped inventing. The obsessive genius that had been defining his character since childhood didn't retire because his business empire had been taken from him. He continued to conceive of innovations. He continued to improve systems. In 1918, 4 years after his death, his 361st and final patent was issued. Even in death, his mind was still solving problems. George Westinghouse died on March 12, 1914, in New York City, at age 67. His wife Marguerite survived him by 3 months. He was initially buried in Woodlawn Cemetery in the Bronx. On December 14, 1915, more than a year later, he was reinterred in Arlington National Cemetery as a Civil War veteran. Marguerite was buried alongside him. His final reflection on his life's work, made in 1904 when he still controlled his company, reveals what had always motivated him. If someday they say of me that, with the air brake, I contributed something to civilization, something to the safety of human life, it will be sufficient. By that measure, and by virtually every historical measure, George Westinghouse's life was extraordinarily sufficient. He invented the compressed air brake that made trains safe, saving millions of lives across 150 years. He chose to commercialize alternating current technology, when Edison had already dominated direct current, winning the war of the currents and determining the technological foundation for modern electrical civilization. He created the natural gas utility industry. He pioneered steam turbine technology that powered modern electrical generation. He built a business philosophy based on worker dignity and competitive markets. While Edison's face appears in textbooks and museums, while Tesla's name inspires documentaries and popular culture references, Westinghouse remains obscure. He was modest. He avoided self-promotion. He let his work speak for itself. In a world that worships celebrity and self-marketing, Westinghouse's modesty has cost him dearly in historical memory. But it hasn't diminished what he actually accomplished. Every time you flip a light switch and electricity flows, you're using AC power distribution that Westinghouse championed. Every time a train stops safely, Its brakes are based on Westinghouse's design. Every time you use natural gas for cooking or heating, you're using a system he created. Every power plant in the world operates on principles he helped establish. He didn't change the world through flashy innovation and self-promotion. He changed the world by obsessively solving problems that others had accepted as permanent. The financial panic of 1907 destroyed Westinghouse's wealth and control. But the technology survived. The systems survived. The infrastructure survived. Westinghouse Electric Company, under new ownership, became one of the largest electrical manufacturers in the world. It continued his work. It continued his vision. In losing control of his company, Westinghouse had actually ensured its success. The systems he built were so sound, so practical, so aligned with reality that they outlasted his personal control and became permanent features of human civilization. Closing. The Invisible Architect. That child throwing tantrums in his father's shop, that boy so obsessive he couldn't let go of any problem, that young man who refused to accept no as a final answer. That obsessive nature never left George Westinghouse. It was refined. It was disciplined. It was channeled through engineering and business strategy. But it remained his fundamental character. The thing that made him difficult as a child made him extraordinary as an adult. George Westinghouse didn't invent electricity. He didn't discover the electron. He didn't create the transformer or the induction motor. But he took these innovations, created by brilliant minds like Tesla and others, and he built the systems that made them universally accessible. He obsessed over every detail until they worked perfectly. He scaled them until they served millions. He structured them so they would last centuries. The problem with Westinghouse is that his greatest achievements are invisible. When you turn on a light, you don't see the AC transmission system carrying power across hundreds of miles. You don't see the transformers stepping down voltage. You don't think about the infrastructure behind the simple act of flipping a switch. But someone had to build it. Someone had to obsess over it. Someone had to refuse to let go until it worked perfectly. That someone was George Westinghouse. He will never achieve Edison's fame. He will never inspire the popular culture references that Tesla generates. But if you live in modern civilization, if you use electricity, if you ride trains, if you cook with natural gas, if you depend on the infrastructure that sustains your life, you are living inside George Westinghouse's achievement. He shaped the world so profoundly that his work has become invisible. That's not a failure. That's the mark of true genius. A man who threw tantrums as a child became a man who channeled obsession into innovation. A man who refused to accept no became a man who built systems that served millions. A man from rural New York became the architect of modern electrical civilization. And a man who lost everything in a financial crisis became a legend that would last forever, even if most people didn't know his name. That is the story of George Westinghouse. That is the forgotten genius who electrified the world. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it and subscribe for more.